The news spread fast. Command had declared her KIA. Her name was entered among the fallen, and those who knew her mourned in silence. On base, no one expected to ever see her again. But just hours later, the gates opened and disbelief swept through the ranks. She appeared, battered and covered in dust, carrying 2 wounded SEALs across her shoulders. The soldiers who had written her off as dead froze in shock. The woman they had mourned was not only alive, but had returned as a savior. And nothing in the room would ever be the same again. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing to join our community of storytellers and listeners. The Memorial Hall of Forward Operating Base Arcadia fell silent as Lieutenant Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood stepped to the podium. Outside, rain pounded against the metal roof, nature's own somber percussion for the ceremony. Rows of soldiers stood at attention, faces impassive, but eyes betraying the collective grief that had settled over the base like a shroud. Today, we honor those who gave the ultimate sacrifice, Blackwood began, his voice carrying a practiced steadiness that did little to mask the hollow undertone. Operation Stillwater has extracted a heavy price. Captain Lorelei Winthrop stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched so tight it threatened to crack. Beside her, Private Fennec's fingers trembled around the dog tags he'd been clutching since the ceremony began. Master Sergeant Orion's weathered face remained stoic, but the slight bow of his head spoke volumes. Combat Medic Specialist Zephyrin Callahan, Blackwood continued, pausing as a portrait was brought forward and placed on the memorial wall. The photograph showed a woman with steel-gray eyes and a composed expression that somehow managed to convey both compassion and unyielding resolve. For a moment, the base's communication officer, Lieutenant Quill, closed his eyes. Just 36 hours earlier, he'd been the one to lose her signal. The memory played in his mind with merciless clarity. The chaotic radio chatter, the sound of rotors straining against hostile fire, and then the desperate voice of Staff Sergeant Breyer crackling through the comms. "Zeph is hit! We can't reach her position." Quill had maintained his professional composure, repeating the call sign over and over, even as the static grew. "Callahan, do you copy? Zephyrin, acknowledge." Only silence had answered as the helicopter's emergency transponder went dark. Now Lieutenant Quill opened his eyes, watching as Colonel Blackwood lifted Zephyrin's medical insignia from a velvet cushion. The silver caduceus, still stained with dried blood despite attempts to clean it, caught the light as it was placed reverently in a display case. "We honor their sacrifice and commit ourselves to ensuring it was not in vain," Blackwood concluded, his voice finally betraying a hint of emotion. The assembled soldiers raised their hands in salute as the base chaplain stepped forward to offer final words. The ceremony continued with military precision, but for many, the world had narrowed to that single photograph on the wall. Zephyrin Callahan had been more than a combat medic. She'd been the steady hands you prayed for when the world went sideways, the calm voice that kept you breathing when your body wanted to quit. After the ceremony, officers gathered outside the hall, their hushed voices carrying on the damp air. "We extracted most of our personnel," Major Hallstrom was saying, consulting a tablet with operational statistics. "Given the intelligence value of the operation, the losses were acceptable." Captain Winthrop's head snapped toward him, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury. Before she could speak, Colonel Blackwood placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. "There's nothing acceptable about losing our people, Major," he said, his tone deceptively mild. "Each name on that wall represents an incalculable loss. Remember that when you prepare your report." Hallstrom had the good sense to look chastened, but Winthrop wasn't mollified. She shrugged off Blackwood's hand and walked away, her posture rigid with anger. As the day progressed, Zephyrin's absence permeated the base like a phantom limb. In the mess hall, her usual seat remained conspicuously empty. The medical bay felt strangely quiet without her efficient movements and occasional humming. At her quarters, a half-written letter to her brother lay on the desk, the pen placed diagonally across the page as if she'd just stepped away for a moment. "She saved my life in Kharkiv," Private Fennec told anyone who would listen, his young face still marked with the scars of that encounter. "Pulled me from a collapsed building with a bullet in her shoulder. Never even mentioned it in her report." "Zephyrin never left anyone behind," Sergeant Orion agreed quietly. "Not even the dead." That was perhaps what made her loss so difficult to process. Zephyrine Callahan had built her reputation on bringing people home, on refusing to accept that anyone was beyond saving. She had once spent 6 hours in a collapsing structure, working to stabilize a soldier with catastrophic injuries that most would have deemed fatal on sight. She cheated death so many times, Lieutenant Quill remarked during dinner, pushing food around his plate without eating. It seemed like she had some kind of arrangement with it. Captain Winthrop, who had been silent since the ceremony, abruptly stood and left without a word. As night fell, the storm intensified, lightning illuminating the mountains surrounding the base in brief, violent flashes. The guards in the watchtowers hunched against the wind, their visibility reduced to almost nothing. Inside the command center, the night shift settled in for what promised to be a long, uncomfortable watch. No one expected the perimeter alarms to blare at 0217 hours. Specialist Nadira, who had been monitoring the thermal imaging systems, straightened in her chair as red warnings flashed across her screen. "Movement at the north perimeter," she announced, her hands flying across the controls to enhance the image. 3 heat signatures approaching checkpoint Alpha. Captain Winthrop, who'd been unable to sleep and had taken to pacing the command center, was immediately at her shoulder. "Friendlies?" "Negative, no transponder signals," Nadira replied, adjusting the sensitivity. "They're coming from the ridge, straight through no man's land." Lieutenant Quill, who had been on communications duty, immediately activated the base alert system. Within moments, Colonel Blackwood strode into the room, having been summoned from his quarters. "Insurgents?" he asked, scanning the monitors. "Movement pattern is unusual, sir," Nadira replied, isolating the thermal signatures. "One signature appears to be carrying or dragging the other 2. "Prisoners?" Lieutenant Quill suggested, though his tone indicated he thought it unlikely. "Or wounded," Winthrop muttered, her eyes narrowing as she studied the screen. Colonel Blackwood's expression darkened. "Deploy the quick reaction force. I want eyes on those signatures immediately." Within minutes, soldiers scrambled to defensive positions along the north wall. Rain lashed against their faces as they peered through night vision goggles toward the tree line. "Contact approaching, 200 meters," came the update over the radio, still unable to confirm identity. Inside the command center, the tension was palpable. If this was an insurgent force, their approach was unprecedented, especially during such severe weather conditions. "Magnify Sector 4, Blackwood ordered, pointing to a section of the perimeter display. The screen zoomed in, showing the heat signatures more clearly. The lead figure was definitely supporting or carrying the other 2, moving with what appeared to be tremendous effort. "Could be a trap," Major Hallstrom suggested from behind them. "Insurgents have used wounded as bait before." "Or it could be our people," Winthrop countered, her voice tight with suppressed hope. Colonel Blackwood made a decision. "Captain, take a team and get visual confirmation. Maintain safe distance and standard identification protocols." Winthrop was moving before he finished speaking, grabbing her gear from a locker near the door. Within minutes, she had joined the forward team at the north gate, rain plastering her hair to her scalp as she raised enhanced binoculars to her eyes. Through sheets of rain, a figure had emerged from the darkness, a solitary silhouette moving with slow, deliberate steps. As lightning flashed, Winthrop caught a glimpse of what appeared to be bodies draped across the figure's shoulders. "Spotlight!" she ordered, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. The powerful beam cut through the downpour, illuminating a scene that defied comprehension. A soldier, or what remained, of one staggered toward the gate. Combat fatigues hung in tatters, revealing bandages fashioned from torn clothing. Blood, mud, and camouflage paint rendered the face nearly unrecognizable, but there was something in the determined set of the jaw that made Winthrop's heart stutter. "Hold your fire!" she screamed into her radio, nearly deafening the communications team. "Hold your fire!" The figure continued forward, bearing the weight of 2 unconscious men in tactical gear. Navy SEALs, Winthrop realized with a jolt of disbelief. Each step seemed an impossible victory against exhaustion. Yet the soldier kept moving with the mechanical persistence of someone operating on nothing but raw will. "Open the gate," Winthrop ordered, her voice breaking. When no one moved, frozen in shock, she repeated with steel in her tone, "Open the damn gate!" The massive barrier began to slide apart as the QRF maintained their positions, weapons still raised. Through the opening staggered the impossible, a ghost made flesh. Combat medic specialist Zephyrine Callahan crossed the threshold, her eyes burning with fierce determination despite her battered body. "Medical," she rasped, the words barely audible above the storm. "Now." The base erupted into controlled chaos. Medics rushed forward, carefully taking the unconscious SEALS from her shoulders. Only when the wounded men were secured on stretchers did Zephyrine allow her posture to falter. Colonel Blackwood approached, his normally imposing presence diminished by sheer disbelief. "Callahan? We thought—" "Not dead yet, sir," she interrupted, swaying slightly. "These men are Lieutenant Commander Alaric Kessler and Chief Petty Officer Talon Mercer, SEAL Team 8, captured 3 days ago. Extraction required." As medics finally approached her, Zephyrine pulled a blood-soaked map from her pocket with trembling fingers. "Enemy positions, marked in red, weapons cache locations in blue, communications array coordinates in green." The colonel took the map, staring at it, and then back at Zephyrine, as if both might vanish if he blinked. Around them, soldiers who hours before had mourned her now stood at rigid attention, many instinctively saluting despite the absence of a formal command. Captain Winthrop broke ranks, grasping Zephyrine's hand as medics prepared to move her. "How did you—" 18 hours, Zephyrine whispered, her eyes finally beginning to lose focus. 18 hours carrying them home. Couldn't leave them behind. As she was lifted onto a stretcher, Zephyrines' final conscious act was to reach toward the SEALS being rushed toward the medical bay. "Make sure they live," she murmured before finally surrendering to exhaustion. The storm continued to rage, but inside Forward Operating Base Arcadia, something had fundamentally changed. The impossible had walked through their gates, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days passed before Zephyrine opened her eyes. The sterile white ceiling of the ED base hospital swam into focus, followed by the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. She became aware of bandages wrapped around her torso, left thigh, and right forearm. An IV drip fed clear fluid into her veins. "Welcome back," came a familiar voice. Captain Winthrop sat in a chair nearby, a tablet in her lap, displaying what appeared to be mission reports. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't left often. Zephyrines' first words came as a rasp. "The SEALS?" A smile touched Winthrop's lips. "Alive, thanks to you. Kessler regained consciousness yesterday, Mercer this morning. The doctors say they'll recover fully, given time." Relief visibly washed over Zephyrines' features before she attempted to sit up, grimacing with the effort. "Easy," Winthrop cautioned, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've got 3 cracked ribs, a bullet graze on your thigh, shrapnel in your arm, and more stitches than I can count." "The intelligence?" Zephyrine pressed, ignoring her own condition. "The map you brought back has already led to 3 successful operations," Winthrop explained, setting the tablet aside. "We've neutralized 2 weapons caches and their primary communications array. Command is calling it a game changer for the entire theater." Zephyrine nodded slightly, then looked away. "I just did my job." A moment of silence stretched between them before Winthrop spoke again, her tone softer. "Your name is still on the memorial wall. Colonel wanted to know if you'd like to attend the ceremony to remove it." "No," Zephyrine replied without hesitation. "Leave it there. For those who didn't make it back." Winthrop studied her face, understanding slowly dawning. "You found others out there, didn't you? People we left behind." Zephyrines' silence was answer enough. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see the base personnel assembling in formation on the parade ground. At the front stood 2 men in hospital gowns over uniform pants. Lieutenant Commander Kessler leaning on a cane, Chief Petty Officer Mercer in a wheelchair. "They've been waiting for you to wake up," Winthrop explained. "They wanted to thank you properly." Zephyrine shook her head slightly. "No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same." "That's not true, and you know it," Winthrop countered, an edge entering her voice. "What you did was impossible. We recovered your helmet cam." Zephyrines' eyes widened slightly. "We saw what you went through out there," Winthrop continued. "The firefights, the river crossing, how you treated their wounds with nothing but a first aid kit and improvised supplies, how you carried both of them when either of them outweighs you by at least 50 pounds. With Winthrop's assistance, Zephyrine moved to the window. Below, Lieutenant Commander Kessler spotted her and, with visible effort, straightened to his full height. He raised his hand in a formal salute. Beside him, Mercer did the same from his wheelchair. One by one, every soldier in formation followed suit. A sea of salutes directed at the hospital window. For the first time since her return, Zephyrines' composure cracked. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "I couldn't leave them," she whispered. "I just couldn't." Over the following days, as Zephyrines' strength gradually returned, the full story of her ordeal emerged in fragments. She had been thrown clear during the helicopter crash, regaining consciousness alone in hostile territory with the wreckage burning some distance away. Despite her injuries, she had made her way to the site, finding no survivors. "I was heading back toward our lines when I heard it," she told Colonel Blackwood during her official debriefing. "A transmission on an emergency frequency, 2 operators in enemy custody being transported to a secondary location." "You intercepted SEAL communications?" Blackwood asked, incredulous. "They were broadcasting in the clear," Zephyrine explained. "Desperate measures. I tracked the signal to an abandoned industrial site 10 clicks east of our last position. The details that followed were clinical in their precision, but nonetheless horrifying. Zephyrine had conducted reconnaissance of the site for 6 hours before identifying the building where the SEALs were being held. Using tactics that even seasoned operators might consider reckless, she had created a diversionary explosion before infiltrating the facility. Kessler was conscious but immobile. "Broken femur," she recounted. "Mercer was unconscious, severe concussion, and internal bleeding. I stabilized them as best I could with what I had." "And then you carried them out," Blackwood stated, his voice flat with disbelief. "There was no alternative, sir." Her tone suggested this was the most reasonable course of action in the world. What the helmet cam footage revealed, however, was far from reasonable. It showed a harrowing escape through enemy-held territory, Zephyrine alternating between carrying one SEAL while dragging the other, then switching when her muscles gave out. It captured her administering emergency medical care under impossible conditions, cauterizing wounds with heated metal, fashioning splints from debris, using strips torn from her own uniform as bandages. At one point, cornered by a patrol, she had hidden the SEALs in dense underbrush before leading the enemy away, engaging them in a firefight that should have been suicidal. Somehow, she had eliminated the threat and returned for her charges. The footage showed her crossing a swift-moving river, Kessler strapped to her back, while she pulled Mercer across on a makeshift raft. It recorded her falling, rising, stumbling, but never stopping. And most remarkably, it captured her speaking to the unconscious men, encouraging them, promising them they would make it home. "You have a wife, Mercer," she'd said during one rest period, checking his pulse, "and a daughter who needs her father, so you keep fighting." And to Kessler, "Your team is waiting for you, Commander. Just a little further." Perhaps most telling was what the footage revealed about the final approach to the base. By then, Zephyrine had been moving for over 18 hours straight. Her body was clearly at its breaking point, yet her pace had actually increased as the base came into view, as if proximity to safety had triggered some final reserve of strength. When the helmet cam footage circulated among senior staff, reactions ranged from stunned silence to outright tears. Major Hallstrom, who had spoken of acceptable losses, requested a transfer after viewing it. The official report classified Zephyrine's actions as beyond the call of duty, but the phrase seemed woefully inadequate. What she had done defied categorization within standard military parlance. 1 week after her return, Zephyrine sat alone on a ridge overlooking the base, still bandaged but healing. The mountains stretched before her, their imposing silhouettes a reminder of the journey she'd made. The sound of footsteps announced Colonel Blackwood's approach before he appeared. "Silver Star," he said without preamble, holding out a document. "Though it should be the Medal of Honor." "No medals," Zephyrine responded firmly, not taking the paper. "Put my name forward for the next extraction mission instead." Blackwood hesitated, studying her profile. "You've done enough, Callahan." "With respect, sir, I'll decide when I've done enough." The colonel nodded slowly, understanding what remained unspoken. He pocketed the commendation. "The intelligence you brought back has saved countless lives. We're hitting targets we didn't even know existed. Zephyrin continued gazing toward the horizon, where enemy territory began. I keep thinking about the ones we leave behind. How many are out there right now, just waiting for someone to come? You can't save everyone, Callahan. Maybe not, she agreed, finally looking at him. But I can try. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the base, Zephyrin's silhouette stood outlined against the darkening sky, a solitary figure representing quiet, unrelenting determination. In the days that followed, her story would spread throughout the military, not through official channels or commendations, but through the whispered accounts of those who witnessed her return. The woman they had mourned hadn't only survived, she had returned as a savior, and in doing so, she had reminded them all of the promise that defined their service. No one gets left behind. The impact of Zephyrin's return extended beyond the immediate shock and awe. It manifested in subtle changes throughout the base. Training intensified, particularly in survival and extraction scenarios. Soldiers who had grown complacent found renewed purpose. Even the most cynical veterans seemed affected, their usual gallows humor giving way to more reflective conversations. Lieutenant Commander Kessler and Chief Petty Officer Mercer remained at the base for 2 weeks, recovering under the care of the medical staff. During that time, they became familiar figures in the hospital wing, often seen sitting with Zephyrin, their conversations private but clearly meaningful. Before their departure, Kessler sought out Captain Winthrop. "I need you to understand something about Callahan," he said, his voice still raspy from the damage to his throat. "When she found us, I was conscious enough to know we were as good as dead. The enemy was planning to move us to a more secure location within hours. We would have disappeared forever." Winthrop nodded, having read the intelligence reports. "I told her to leave me, to just take Mercer and go," Kessler continued. "She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, said, 'That's not how this works, Commander.' Then she splinted my leg using parts from an abandoned vehicle and her own bootlaces." He paused, struggling with the memory. "During the escape, there was a moment when we were pinned down by enemy fire. I was fading in and out, but I remember her placing both of us in cover. Before she left to engage the threat, she put my hand on my sidearm. Said if she didn't come back, I should use it rather than be captured again." Kessler's eyes met Winthrop's. "She eliminated 4 combatants on her own, then returned covered in blood, not all of it hers. She never mentioned it afterward, just checked our vitals and kept moving. After the SEALs departed, life at Forward Operating Base Arcadia attempted to return to normal, but normal had been redefined. The memorial wall remained unchanged, Zephyrin's name and photograph still in place at her insistence, a reminder of both what had been lost and what had been inexplicably regained. Zephyrin herself resisted any special treatment, returning to her duties in the medical bay as soon as she was cleared. If she noticed the way others looked at her, with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, she gave no indication. She worked with the same quiet efficiency as before, though perhaps with a new intensity, as if even routine tasks had taken on greater significance. At night, however, those in neighboring quarters reported hearing her pacing, restless and wakeful, and on clear evenings she could often be found on the ridge overlooking the base, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon as if listening for calls that only she could hear. 2 months after her miraculous return, Zephyrin found herself summoned to the command center. The base had settled into a new rhythm, operations continuing with increased efficiency following the intelligence she had provided. Though her physical wounds had mostly healed, leaving only fresh scars among the older ones, she still felt the phantom weight of the SEALS on her shoulders some nights. Colonel Blackwood was waiting with Captain Winthrop and several officers she didn't recognize. Their formal postures and the presence of outsiders immediately put her on alert. "Specialist Callahan," Blackwood began, unusually formal. "These gentlemen are from Joint Special Operations Command. They have a proposal for you." A tall man with close-cropped silver hair stepped forward. "Colonel Hayes, ma'am, we've been following your recovery with great interest." Zephyrin maintained her composure, though her mind raced. JSOC involvement usually meant classified operations, the kind that existed in shadows and redacted reports. "We're assembling a specialized extraction team," Hayes continued. "Personnel with unique skills for recovering high-value individuals from denied areas. Your name came up rather forcefully." "From Commander Kessler, I presume," Zephyrin said, connecting the dots. Hayes nodded. Among others. Chief Mercer was quite eloquent as well. He handed her a folder. This is a formal invitation to selection. It's entirely voluntary, of course. Zephyrin accepted the folder, but didn't open it. May I ask a question, sir? Of course. This team, would it be limited to high-value personnel only? Or would its mandate extend to any captured or stranded service members? Hayes exchanged glances with Blackwood before answering. The primary mission would focus on high-value recovery, but the parameters could potentially expand based on operational realities. Zephyrin studied his face, reading between the carefully chosen words. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. I'll need time to consider it. Of course. We'll need your answer within 48 hours. After they departed, Zephyrin remained with Colonel Blackwood and Captain Winthrop. The silence hung between them until Blackwood finally spoke. It's an exceptional opportunity, Callahan. Not many specialists get approached by JSOC directly. It's also exceptionally dangerous, Winthrop added, concern evident in her voice. These operations would make your SEAL rescue look like a training exercise. Zephyrin nodded, fingers tracing the edge of the folder. I'm aware of the implications, Captain. What are you thinking? Blackwood asked, studying her closely. I'm thinking about the definition of high value, sir. She met his gaze directly. And who decides which lives meet that threshold? That evening, Zephyrin returned to her ridge overlooking the base. The folder lay unopened beside her as she watched the sunset paint the mountains in deepening shades of amber and gold. The beauty contrasted sharply with the violence these peaks had witnessed, the lives they had claimed. The sound of approaching footsteps announced Captain Winthrop's arrival. Without speaking, the captain settled beside her, offering a thermos of coffee. They sat in companionable silence until Winthrop finally asked, Have you decided? Not yet, Zephyrin admitted. The opportunity is remarkable, but the constraints trouble me. The high-value designation? Yes. Zephyrin took a sip of coffee. In my experience, Captain, value isn't determined by rank or clearance level. The private who throws himself on a grenade to save his squad is just as valuable as any general. Winthrop nodded slowly. I understand your reservation. But consider this, Callahan. Within the JSOC framework, you might have opportunities to expand those parameters, change the system from within. Or be constrained by it, Zephyrin countered. Perhaps. Winthrop studied her profile. But you've already proven yourself quite adept at ignoring constraints when necessary. This drew a rare smile from Zephyrin. Is that your official recommendation, Captain? Join JSOC and ignore their rules? My official recommendation is that you follow your conscience, which has proven to be an exceptional compass so far. Winthrop stood, brushing dirt from her uniform. Whatever you decide, your place here remains secure. After Winthrop departed, Zephyrin finally opened the folder. Inside was not only the expected transfer orders and operational overview, but something unexpected. A handwritten note from Lieutenant Commander Kessler. Callahan, what you did cannot be adequately rewarded or recognized within standard channels. This opportunity is the closest we can come to acknowledging your exceptional humanity. Whatever you decide, know that you've already changed the game. With enduring respect, Kessler. Attached was a photograph. Not a military image, but a personal one. Kessler with his arm around Mercer, both in civilian clothes, standing with their families, children, spouses, parents, all smiling. On the back was written simply, The lives you saved extend beyond just 2. Morning brought clarity. Zephyrin reported to Colonel Blackwood's office at 0800 sharp, decision made. I'm declining the JSOC offer, sir, she stated without preamble. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. May I ask why? Their operational parameters are too restrictive, she explained. I believe my skills are better utilized in my current role, where I can respond to all personnel in need, not just those designated high value. To her surprise, Blackwood smiled. I suspected as much. I've taken the liberty of drafting an alternative. He slid a document across his desk. A proposal for a specialized medical extraction unit, operating under direct base command, but with expanded operational flexibility. Zephyrin scanned the document, eyes widening slightly. This would allow for discretionary rescue operations without the bureaucratic approval chain. Within reasonable tactical parameters, yes, Blackwood confirmed. The unit would consist of volunteers only, individuals willing to accept the inherent risks of such operations. And Command has approved this? Provisionally, Blackwood admitted. They're calling it a pilot program. Its continuation will depend on demonstrated results and acceptable casualty rates. By acceptable, they mean zero, Zephyrin translated. Ideally. But realistically, they understand the nature of the mission. He leaned forward. I'm offering you command of the unit, specialist. A field promotion to lieutenant would accompany the position. Zephyrin's expression remained neutral, but her mind was already calculating possibilities, requirements, training protocols. I'd need complete autonomy in selecting personnel, granted within base resources, and priority access to intelligence regarding missing or captured personnel, regardless of classification. Blackwood hesitated only briefly. I'll make it happen. Then I accept, sir. She straightened. When can I begin? Immediately. The office adjacent to the medical bay has been reassigned to your unit. Captain Winthrop will assist with the administrative transition. As Zephyrin turned to leave, Blackwood added, One more thing, Lieutenant. She paused at the rank. The unit needs a designation. Something suitable for official communications. Zephyrin considered for a moment. Lazarus, she said finally. Call it Lazarus Unit. The biblical reference wasn't lost on Blackwood, the one who returned from the dead. Very appropriate, he acknowledged with a nod. Dismissed, Lieutenant Callahan. The weeks that followed brought feverish activity. Zephyrin transformed the assigned office into an operations center, walls covered with maps of the region and personnel statistics. She conducted interviews personally, seeking not just technical proficiency, but a specific mindset. Individuals who shared her conviction that no one should be left behind. Her core team emerged organically. Sergeant Orion, whose tracking skills were unmatched. Private Fennec, whose brush with death had left him with a fierce dedication to saving others. Lieutenant Quill, whose communications expertise would prove vital. And Specialist Nadira, whose analytical mind could find patterns in chaos. Captain Winthrop, though not officially part of the unit, became its staunchest advocate in command meetings, securing resources and clearances that might otherwise have been denied. Training was rigorous and unconventional. Zephyrin emphasized adaptability over procedure, innovation over doctrine. They practiced extractions under impossible conditions, improvised medical care with minimal supplies, and endurance drills that push beyond normal human limits. The difference between success and failure, she told her team during one particularly grueling exercise, isn't equipment or firepower. It's the absolute refusal to accept that someone can't be saved. 3 months after its formation, Lazarus Unit received its first operational test. A reconnaissance team had missed 2 consecutive check-ins from a sector known for heavy enemy activity. Standard protocol classified them as missing, presumed captured, with extraction deemed too high risk given the strategic value of their mission. Zephyrin presented her operational plan to Colonel Blackwood with the calm efficiency that had become her trademark. We'll insert here, she indicated on the map, using the storm front as cover. Intelligence suggests they were investigating this compound when communications ceased. That's less than 2 kilometers from a known enemy stronghold, Blackwood observed, concern evident. Yes, sir, which is why we'll approach from the North Ridge. It's considered impassable, especially in current weather conditions. Considered impassable by whom? A ghost of a smile touched Zephyrin's lips. By those who haven't tried hard enough, sir. Blackwood studied the plan, noting its precision and the multiple contingencies built into each phase. The risk assessment is still classified as extreme. With respect, sir, so was my return with the SEALs. Her voice remained professional, but her eyes conveyed what remained unspoken. Some missions transcended risk assessments. After a long moment, Blackwood nodded. Operation approved, Lieutenant. Bring them home. 26 hours later, as dawn broke over forward operating base Arcadia, the perimeter guards reported movement at the south gate. Through the morning mist emerged the members of Lazarus Unit, battered but intact, supporting between them the missing reconnaissance team, all 4 members alive despite severe injuries. As medical personnel rushed forward, Zephyrine stepped aside, allowing her team to receive the acknowledgement they deserved. Colonel Blackwood approached, taking in her exhausted appearance and the clear signs of combat she'd encountered. "Mission successful, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir. All personnel recovered." Her clinical tone belied the extraordinary nature of what they had accomplished. "Casualties?" "None, sir." Specialist Nadira took shrapnel to the shoulder, but remained operational. "We encountered enemy forces at the extraction point, but disengaged without losses." Blackwood nodded, knowing that disengaged likely involved significant tactical creativity. "Your after-action report will make interesting reading, I'm sure." As the recovered team was taken to the medical bay, one of them, a sergeant with a bandaged head wound, called out to Zephyrine. "They said no one was coming for us, that we'd been written off." Zephyrine met his gaze steadily. "They were misinformed, Sergeant." In the months that followed, Lazarus Unit conducted 17 operations, resulting in the recovery of 32 personnel who would otherwise have been abandoned to capture or death. Their methods remained unorthodox, their casualty rate improbably low, and their reputation grew into something approaching legend among the forces in the region. For Zephyrine, however, the mission remained deeply personal. Each successful extraction was not just a tactical victory, but the fulfillment of a promise, spoken or unspoken, that no one who served would be forgotten or forsaken. Each life saved represented families who would not receive folded flags, children who would not grow up without parents, futures that would not be prematurely extinguished. 1 year after her own return from presumed death, Lieutenant Zephyrine Callahan stood once more on the ridge overlooking the base. The memorial wall still bore her name, a reminder that had become a kind of talisman for the personnel of Forward Operating Base Arcadia. In a war where certainty was scarce, it represented an immutable truth. Sometimes, against all odds, the lost returned. And as long as Zephyrine Callahan drew breath, many more would follow.